The first note stopped every hand in my hall from lifting its cup. I had not meant to look. I had meant to endure the evening the way I endured every masquerade my council arranged for me, a wall of masked faces, 100 voices competing to be heard over the fire, and my own patience worn thin as old rope. I had spent the hour before that note nodding at toasts I did not care for, listening to visiting lords describe their daughters' virtues as though virtues were livestock to be weighed and priced, and wondering, not for the first time, why I bothered opening Fernhallow's hall to guests who treated my hospitality as a market stall. My steward had promised me the evening would pass quickly if I simply smiled enough. I had stopped believing him an hour in. But a cluster of visiting nobles near the West Arch had just shoved a slight, cloaked figure toward my old harp, laughing behind their painted masks, and I turned only to see what cruelty they intended to enjoy. "Go on, then," their ringleader said, a broad man in a gilded fox mask, his voice pitched to carry. "You were invited to fill a chair, girl, not to sit warming it all night. Give the court a song." He said court like a man dropping a stone down a well, only to hear the splash and laugh at it. The girl he had pushed did not stumble, though I think stumbling was the whole point of the shove. She caught herself with one hand on the harp's carved shoulder, straightened, and went very still. Her mask was plain, pale wood, unpainted, cut in the shape of a moth's wings against the gilt and jewels of the nobles ringed around her. A modest gray gown, high at the throat, marked her as someone's poor relation or a companion brought along to be useful and otherwise invisible. I did not know her name. I had not, until that moment, known she existed in my hall at all. The fox-masked lord's companions were already smiling at each other, waiting for the humiliation to begin. I saw it in the tilt of their heads, the way they leaned in like men gathered to watch a dog fail to walk on its hind legs. I had seen that particular lean before, at other feasts, aimed at other unlucky guests who had made the mistake of standing too near the wrong circle of wit. I had always meant to put a stop to it and always found some more pressing matter first. I did not know, watching it now, that this would be the last night I ever let it pass unanswered. "Perhaps she cannot play at all," one of the fox lord's companions said, a woman in a mask of painted feathers, loud enough to be overheard and clearly meaning to be. "Perhaps that is the whole joke, my lord, that she will simply sit there." "Then we shall have our evening sport either way," the fox-masked lord answered, and the circle around him laughed the easy, ugly laugh of people who have already decided how a story will end before it begins. She set her fingers to the strings. And Fernhallow's great hall, which had not gone quiet for me in 11 years of feast nights, went quiet for her. The sound she drew out was not the plunking, apologetic noise the mockers had bought their tickets to laugh at. It was low first, a single held note like a held breath, and then it opened, unhurried, precise, each phrase placed like a stone set into a wall by a mason who had built 100 walls before and trusted his own hands completely. I did not know the melody. I have turned it over in my memory every night since and still could not name where I had heard something like it. Some old lullaby worn down to its bones and given back its shape. I found I had crossed half the hall before I noticed I was walking. I am Colwyn, king of this pack in this valley, and I have stood over battle lines without my pulse changing its pace. It changed now. Not the old warning drum that means a threat is close, something else, quieter and stranger, a sensation like a held note resolving finally into the chord it was always meant to complete, a rightness settling into my chest the way a key finally turns after years in the wrong lock. I did not have a word for it. I still do not have a better one than that. The fox-masked lord's smile had gone thin and confused, the way a man's smile goes when the joke he paid for refuses to land. "She plays for coin sometimes, my king," he said quickly, as I drew near enough that he felt obliged to explain himself. "A little talent, nothing worth." "Be silent," I said, and did not look at him again. I stood at the edge of the firelight and watched her hands instead. They were not the hands of a court lady, soft and ringed. They were a little rough at the fingertips, sure of themselves in a way that spoke of long practice in a room with no audience at all. The moth mask hid everything but her mouth and the line of her jaw, and yet I could not have named a single other face in that hall if you had asked me to. Not the fox lords, not my own stewards, not even my sisters, who I knew stood somewhere near the dais in her silver owl mask, watching me with open astonishment. The song ended on a note that seemed to hang in the rafters a moment before it let go. Silence. Then ragged and late applause, the nobles who had shoved her forward clapping loudest of all now, already trying to claim credit for having discovered her, already recasting their cruelty as generosity in the space of a breath. I have seen cowardice do that before. It is always fastest on its feet. She rose from the harp bench and dropped a small, correct curtsy to the room in general, to no one in particular, and made to step back into the crowd's shadow as if she had never meant to be seen at all. I did not let the crowd close over her. "Stay a moment," I said. Every mask in the hall turned toward us. I felt it, the way a man feels whether changing on his skin, and I did not care. I have given my people order after order in this hall, and never once felt the words catch in my throat the way these did, small and plain as they were. She went still again, the way she had at the harp before the first note, and I understood that stillness now, not fear exactly, but the particular alertness of someone who has learned that being noticed rarely goes well for her. Her moth mask tilted up to me. Behind the carved eye holes I could see only a suggestion of dark eyes, wary, waiting to see what kind of king would use those words. "You played well," I said, which was true and also nothing, a placeholder for the great unruly thing I could not yet say to a masked stranger in front of 200 witnesses. "I was asked to play my lord," she said. Her voice was low, careful, pitched only for me and the small circle around us, though I suspect half the hall strained to hear it anyway. I did not mean to keep the court waiting on a poor performance. It was not poor. You are kind to say so. I am not known for kindness, I said, and something in her stilled further, listening, weighing that. Ask my counsel. I am known for very little patience and a great deal of suspicion toward court entertainments arranged at my expense. Tonight is the first in some years I have been glad of one. I heard the fox-masked lord shift his weight nearby, no doubt working out whether this was a compliment he could still claim some part of. I did not look at him. I kept my eyes on the moth mask, on the two dark eyes behind it, and felt that same rightness deepen, as if a hand I had not known was cold was finally being warmed. "What is your name?" I asked. A pause, not coy but genuinely uncertain whether the question was safe to answer. "Bryolin," she said at last. "I am here at Lady Ansker's invitation, a companion only, my king. I filled a chair that would otherwise have gone empty." "You filled it very well." I glanced finally at the fox-masked lord, whose guilt was beginning to look a little tarnished under my attention. Better, I think, than the chair's owner intended. He had the grace to say nothing. His companions had already begun to drift half a step away from him, the way courtiers do when they sense a man's favor curdling and want no part of the spill. My sister found me then, slipping through the loosening crowd with her silver owl mask pushed back on her hair, close enough that only I would hear her. "You have never crossed this hall for anyone in 11 years, she said, low and quick, half delight and half disbelief. "Not for a duchess, not for the ambassador's daughter, not even for that visiting princess who wept when you would not dance with her. What is this, Colwyn?" "I do not entirely know yet," I admitted. "I only know I could not stay where I was standing." "That is not an answer." "It is the only honest one I have," I said, and she studied my face a moment longer with the particular sharpness of a sister who has watched a brother guard himself for a decade and knows exactly what it looks like when the guarding fails. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her, because she only shook her head, something like wonder in it, and said, "Then I suppose I had better go make certain no one says anything foolish before you've worked out what to do with it," and left to run interference among the watching nobles before I had even thought to ask her to. The musicians in the gallery, unsure whether to resume, held their instruments in an uneasy hush. I lifted one hand, a small gesture enough. They began again, something slower this time, and the hall exhaled and returned to its noise, though I felt eyes still cutting toward us all evening, unable quite to let the moment go. "Will you walk with me?" I asked her. "Only to the terrace. I find I would rather hear how a companion learns to play like that than return to being toasted by men who want something from me." She considered it. I liked that she considered it, that she did not simply fold into whatever a king asked, the way so many at my court had learned to. "I would need Lady Ansgar's leave," she said. "I am her guest, not my own, tonight." "Then we will ask her together," I said, "so no one may say afterward that I stole a companion out from under her mistress's nose." That at least earned the ghost of a smile at the corner of her mouth, the only part of her face I could read. It was enough to make the walk across that crowded hall feel like the most important crossing I had made in 11 years of ruling it. Lady Ansgar proved easy enough to find and easier still to persuade, once a king does the asking. She was a broad, good-humored widow in an owl mask of her own, delighted rather than suspicious at the request, and she waved us off toward the terrace with the air of a woman already composing the story she meant to tell at breakfast. The terrace ran along the north wall of the hall, open to the night, torches guttering in iron brackets, the noise of the feast falling behind us like a door swinging shut. Above the valley the moon was 3/4 full, the pines on the ridge black against a sky gone the deep blue-violet of a healing bruise. Brylin stood at the balustrade with her hands folded, the moth mask still in place, though out here in the cooler air she seemed less braced than she had inside. "You did not have to defend me," she said without turning. "I have been laughed at before. It does not break anything in me any more." "That may be true," I said, coming to stand beside her, close enough to speak quietly, far enough that she could step away if she wished it. "But it is not why I stopped it." "Then why?" I thought of how to say it honestly without frightening her off the terrace entirely. "Because the moment your first note sounded, something in this hall that has been asleep in me for a long while woke up and would not go back to sleep no matter how I reasoned with it. I have felt many things standing in that hall over the years. I have never before felt as though a room had rearranged itself around one person." She turned to look at me properly then, the moth mask catching torchlight along its carved edges. "That is a strange thing to say to a woman you have known the length of one song." "I am aware," I said. "I have turned the strangeness over several times already, and cannot make it smaller." "Perhaps," she said, careful again, "you are simply relieved the joke did not succeed. Kings dislike being made fools of at their own feasts. It reflects on the house." "If that were the whole of it," I said, "I would have corrected the fox-masked lord and gone back to my wine. I would not be standing on a cold terrace asking a stranger about her hands." I nodded at them, folded on the stone rail, the same rough-tipped fingers that had drawn that impossible sound from an old harp. "Where did you learn to play like that, Brylin, if you are only a companion filling an empty chair?" Something shifted in her, a loosening, as though the question had found a door she had expected to stay shut all night. "My mother played," she said. "Before Fernhallow was Fernhallow to me, before my father died and the debts came, and Lady Ansgar took me in for want of anywhere better to put me. My mother taught me on a harp half the size of that one, in a cottage with a leaking roof, and told me that whatever else was taken from us, no one could take the sound out of my hands unless I let them. I have not had much reason to play for anyone since she died. Tonight I did not intend to play for anyone either. I was pushed." "I know," I said. "I saw the shove." "And still you say it was not pity that brought you across the hall." "It was not pity," I said, and here was the harder truth, the one I had been circling since the first note. It felt, if I am honest with you, like recognition. As though I had been listening my whole life for a particular sound without knowing it was a sound I was waiting for, and then you made it, and the waiting simply ended. I shook my head, frustrated at my own clumsiness with the words. I do not say this well. I am a king, not a poet, but I have not been able to look away from you since your first note, and I do not think that is an ordinary thing, and I would rather tell you so plainly than let you wonder if I am only being courteous. The torchlight moved on the moth mask as she was quiet for a long moment, searching me the way I had searched her hands. I do not know what to do with that, she said finally. I came here tonight to be unseen. It is safer for someone like me, among people like that lord and his friends, to be unseen. And now the Alpha King of Fernhallow tells me he cannot look away. I am not asking you to do anything with it tonight, I said. Only to know it is true. I would not have you frightened into believing I want more from you than you are willing to give. I have watched enough of my own council trade daughters like coin at feasts like this one. I will not be another hand reaching for you before you have decided whether you wish to be reached for. She let out a breath, something between a laugh and a release. That, she said, is the strangest kindness a king has ever offered me. Most men state their want, as though the stating settles the matter. I have had a very short evening to learn that you are not most matters, I said, and this time her almost smile became a real one, quick and startled, gone as fast as it came, but I had seen it, and I meant to see it again before the night was through. She looked out over the dark valley for a while after that, and I let the silence sit, unwilling to crowd it. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its earlier caution. May I ask you something a companion is not usually permitted to ask a king? You may ask me anything you like. I cannot promise I will answer wisely, but I will answer honestly. Why do you keep a harp in your hall at all, if you find these feasts such poor company? Lady Ansker says you rarely smile at your own gatherings. I wondered, sitting there before they pushed me forward, what a king does with an instrument he never seems to want played. I considered the question longer than it perhaps deserved, because the honest answer surprised even me in the saying of it. My mother played it, I said, before my father took the crown from his own father, and the pack grew larger than any one hall could comfortably hold. She used to say a harp in a great hall was a small rebellion, that a room built for command should also hold something built only for beauty, so a king would not forget there was a difference. I do not think I have heard it played the way she meant it to be played since she died. Tonight is the first time since that I understood what she was trying to tell me. Brylan was quiet at that, and when I glanced at her, I found her studying me with an attention that felt, for the first time that evening, entirely undefended. That is not a small thing to tell a stranger on a terrace, she said. No, I agreed. It is not. I find I do not mind telling it to you. She was quiet a moment, turning something over. May I tell you a small thing in return, since you have been so generous with yours? I would like nothing better. I almost did not come tonight, she said. Lady Ansker pressed the invitation on me for a week before I agreed, and even walking through your gates I thought of turning back 3 separate times. I have learned at gatherings like this one that it is safer to be forgotten than remembered. Forgotten women are not laughed at. They are not shoved toward harps to be someone's evening amusement. I came only because Lady Ansker has been kind to me when she owed me no kindness at all, and I did not wish to disappoint her by staying home. I am glad, selfishly, that you did not turn back, I said, though I understand now why the shove frightened you more than it might have frightened someone with less cause to expect cruelty. It did not frighten me as much as you might think, she said, and there was a flicker of something proud in it, quickly banked. I have played through worse rooms than that one. My mother used to say that a harp does not care who is listening, only whether the hands upon it are honest. I decided, somewhere in the second measure, that I would rather be honest in front of 200 mocking strangers than small in front of them. It seemed, in the moment, like the only true choice left to me. "It was the right one," I said. "I do not think I have seen bravery dressed as quietly as that in a very long while." It did not feel brave. It felt like refusing to disappear on command. "That may be the same thing," I said, "more often than either of us has given it credit for." We did not stay long on the terrace. She was mindful of Lady Ansgar's goodwill, and I was mindful that a king vanishing too long from his own feast invited exactly the kind of talk I did not want swirling around her before she had chosen anything for herself. But when we returned to the hall, I did not let her drift back into its shadows the way she had tried to before. I kept her near enough at the edge of my circle that anyone still nursing the shape of that earlier joke could see plainly how it had curdled. The fox-masked lord found occasion, an hour on, to approach again, his earlier bravado sanded down to something more careful. "My king," he said, "I hope there was no lasting offense in the evening's sport. It was only meant as harmless amusement." "There is a kind of harm," I said, "that does not announce itself as harm because the man doing it is laughing. I would think carefully, my lord, before you arrange more amusement at the expense of anyone under my roof who did not ask to be your entertainment. Fernhallow is not your hall to spend other people's dignity in." He bowed low enough to hide whatever his face was doing, and did not linger near us again that night. Brylan, beside me, said nothing, but I felt the small ease in her shoulders, the loosening of a tension I suspected she had carried through every feast she had ever been dragged along to. That was worth more to me than any applause the harp had earned her. The feathered masked woman tried her own small cruelty a while later, drifting near us with a cup in each hand as though she meant only to offer refreshment. "You must be very pleased with yourself," she said to Brylan, sweet as spoiled honey, plucked out of a corner and suddenly the evening's whole conversation. "I do hope you remember when the king tires of the novelty that you were only ever meant to fill a chair." I felt the old anger rise in me, quick and clean, but Brylan answered before I could. "I have not forgotten what I was meant to be tonight," she said, perfectly level. "I have simply stopped agreeing to it. There is a difference, my lady, and I find I like this side of it better." The feathered woman's smile thinned considerably, and she found somewhere else to be soon after. I looked at Brylan with something close to open admiration. "You did not need me for that one," I said. "No," she said, "but I noticed you were ready to answer it for me anyway. I will not pretend that did not matter." "It will always matter to me," I said, "whether you need the answering or not." We did not speak of it further, but I saw something settle in her after that exchange, not trust yet, not fully, but the first loosening of a door that had been held shut a long while. I found myself content to wait at that door as long as she required, though the low, steady note in my chest made patience harder work than it had ever been in 11 years of ruling a restless valley. The night wore on toward midnight the way such nights do, the music growing slower, the crowd thinning at its edges, until the steward came at last to the center of the hall to call the unmasking, as tradition demanded at the turn of the hour. A ripple went through the room, masks lifted, laughter at faces half remembered from years past, small cries of recognition here and there. I turned to Brylan before I reached for my own mask. "Whatever is beneath that mask," I said, "I think I have already met the truest part of you tonight, in your hands and your voice and the quiet way you tried to disappear after you had done something extraordinary. But I confess I would like very much to see the rest." "You may not feel the same once you have," she said, though there was no real fear in it now, only the old habit of bracing for disappointment. "I will wager my crown that I will feel a great deal more," I said, and reached up, and drew off my own mask first, so that whatever came next, she would not be the only one standing exposed. She reached up then, and lifted the moth mask away. I will not pretend I can describe, even now, exactly what I saw, because what struck me was not any particular measure of her face. not the shape of her eyes or the line of her mouth, though I found both lovely enough to hold a man's attention across a hall for the rest of his life. What struck me was the sensation that ran through me the instant her whole, unhidden face turned up to mine. A single clean note, struck once, deep in the same place where I had felt that first strange rightness when her harp began, except now the note did not fade the way a plucked string does. It held. It has held every hour since, low and constant, as if some silent instrument in my chest had been strung correctly at last, and someone had drawn one true chord across it and let it ring. "Brylan," I said, and her name in my own mouth felt like the answer to a question I had been too proud, until tonight, to know I was asking. The hall had gone quiet around us again, not with the sharp hush of the harp's first note this time, but with the slower quiet of people realizing they were witnessing something they would be asked to describe for years afterward. I did not look away from her to see who watched. I had had enough, by then, of looking anywhere but at her. "They pushed you toward that harp to shame you," I said, loud enough now that the fox-masked lord, unmasked at last into an ordinary, unremarkable face across the room, could hear every word of it plainly. "They meant for the whole court to laugh. I want it said clearly, tonight, under my own roof, so that no one repeats their mistake. The joke did not succeed. It found the one true thing in this hall I have been missing without knowing its name, and it handed her to me in front of everyone who thought they were mocking her. I do not think I have ever been more grateful for anyone's cruelty than I am for theirs tonight, because it is the reason I am standing here." "You owe them nothing for that," Brylan said, low only for me, though I saw the corner of her mouth fighting a smile again. "No," I agreed. "But I find I am not above enjoying that they will have to watch it end this way." She laughed then, properly, the sound of it as unguarded and true as the first note she had drawn from the harp, and I thought that if I lived to be an old man telling this story by my own fire, I would still remember that laugh as the moment the evening truly turned. Not the mockery, not even the unmasking, but Brylan laughing without fear in the middle of a hall that had tried, hours before, to make her small. Lady Ansgar reached us not long after, her owl mask entirely forgotten atop her head, her face bright with the particular satisfaction of a woman who suspects she has stumbled into the middle of a story she will be asked to retell at every gathering for the rest of her days. "Brylan," she said, taking both the younger woman's hands in her own, "I believe I ought to have introduced you to the king a great deal sooner, though I confess I had no notion what I was setting in motion by bringing you at all." "Neither had I," Brylan said, and there was a lightness in her voice I had not heard until that moment, as though some old weight had finally been set down. "I owe you my thanks regardless," I told Lady Ansgar. "Whatever you intended by the invitation, I do not think Fernhallow will forget the result of it." She beamed at that, entirely unbothered by the many eyes still watching us from the edges of the hall, and I understood that whatever gossip found its way out of my feast that night would find in her a willing and delighted source. I found, strangely, that I did not mind. Let the story be told plainly and often. It was a truer story than most that circulated through my halls, and it deserved better than to be whispered as though it were shameful. I did not press her that night for more than she was ready to give. A bond struck once does not need to be dragged into the light before its time. I had learned enough that evening to know patience would serve us both better than urgency. But I asked Lady Ansgar's leave to call on her companion properly. As a man calls on a woman, he intends to court in earnest rather than a king collecting a curiosity. And Lady Ansgar, still delighted with herself for having brought her, granted it with the pleasure of a woman who suspected she would be dining out on the story for the rest of her life. My counsel, predictably, had a great deal to say about it by the time I met them the following morning. I let them say most of it before I answered, because I have learned over the years that a counsel allowed to exhaust its objections aloud is easier to reason with than one still holding them in reserve. "A companion, my king," my eldest adviser said, in the careful tone of a man picking his way across ice he suspects will not hold. No house behind her, no lands, no alliance to be gained. The visiting lords will call it beneath Fernhillow's dignity. The visiting lords, I said, spent the evening shoving her toward a harp for their own amusement and calling it sport. I am not overly concerned with what men of that character consider dignified. It will be remarked upon, another said more gently. Kings do not often choose so plainly without regard for what the choice costs the throne. I have spent 11 years choosing everything for what it costs the throne, I said. My father taught me to weigh every marriage like a treaty, and I have done so dutifully, and it has left me, until 3 nights ago, entirely alone in every hour that was not spent governing. I find I am no longer willing to call that wisdom. I would rather be remarked upon for choosing rightly than praised for choosing safely. There was a silence at that, the particular silence of men recalculating a king they thought they understood. It was my sister again, who broke it, arriving late and settling into her chair with the air of someone already certain how the argument would end. For what it is worth, she said, I watched him cross that hall before he had decided to move his feet. I do not think this is a whim any of you will succeed in arguing him out of, and I would advise against wasting the morning trying. The council did not entirely relent that day, nor the next, but they stopped arguing and started watching instead, which I have found is usually how a court comes around to a truth it cannot yet say aloud. By the time a month had passed, even my eldest adviser had taken to asking, with careful casualness, whether Brialin might be persuaded to play at the autumn gathering. In the weeks that followed, I learned the rest of what the moth mask and the crowded hall had not shown me, that Brialin kept a small garden behind Lady Ansker's rooms where nothing grew that she had not coaxed there herself, that she hummed under her breath while she worked and stopped self-consciously whenever she noticed she'd been heard, that she distrusted flattery on principle and required a man to earn every kind word he wanted her to believe. I earned them slowly. I found I did not mind the slowness at all. I came to that garden often in those first weeks, more often than a king with a valley to govern had any right to. I told myself the first few visits were only courtesy, the proper follow-through of a promise made on a terrace, but by the 3rd week I no longer bothered with the excuse. I would find her on her knees in the dirt, sleeves pushed back, coaxing some stubborn root into the ground, and she would look up at me with an expression that had stopped being wary somewhere between the 2nd visit and the 5th. You have the look of a man who has escaped his own counsel again, she said once, not looking up from the bed of herbs she was working. I have, I admitted. They wished to discuss grain tithes for the better part of an hour. I found I preferred to discuss nothing at all in your garden instead. That is not a very kingly ambition. No, I said, crouching beside her without invitation, though she did not ask me to leave. But it is an honest one, and I have decided honesty suits me better than most of what my counsel recommends. She laughed at that, low and unguarded, the same laugh I had first heard in the hall the night the masks came off, and I thought, not for the first time, that I would have traded every tithe in Fernhillow to hear it more often. Every evening after, when the light allowed it, I sat with her while she played, not the grand harp from the feast hall but a smaller one Lady Ansker had found for her, tucked in a sitting room with a window that caught the last of the sun. She was shy of the attention at first, stopping if I watched too openly, so I learned to listen instead with my eyes elsewhere, on the darkening garden or the fire, until she trusted that I was not waiting to judge her but simply glad to be near the sound. Every evening that same held note settled a little deeper into its place in my chest, until it no longer felt like a note at all, only the ordinary sound of a life becoming whole. There were harder evenings too, ones I do not think a story such as this is obliged to smooth over. She asked me once plainly whether I meant to make her a queen the pack would resent, a woman with no great house behind her name, no dowry, no allies to bring to my table. They will say you married a companion because a harp made you foolish for an evening, she said. I do not want to be a story they tell about your weakness. Let them tell it, I said. I have never once needed my pack's permission to know my own mind, and I do not intend to start seeking it now over the one matter I am most certain of. If any among them doubt you, they may say so to me directly, and I will answer them exactly as I answered the fox-masked lord. That is not the same as making the doubt disappear. No, I agreed, but it is the same as making certain you are never left to answer it alone. That is the only promise I know how to make honestly tonight. The rest, I think, we will prove together slowly, the way you taught that garden to grow. She did not answer in words that evening, only reached for my hand where it rested on the bench between us, and let her fingers close around mine the way they closed, sure and unhurried, around the strings of her harp. I have held councils and armies and the whole weight of Fernhallow in these two hands. I do not think anything settled into them as completely as that quiet, deliberate grip. There was one evening, near the turn of that first season, when I brought her not to the garden or the sitting room, but to the old training yard behind the eastern wall, empty at that hour, but for a pair of real wolves that ran loose within my walls the way they had since my grandfather's day, gray and quiet, and utterly unbothered by crowns or titles. Brylin stopped short at the sight of them, not from fear, I think, but from the particular wonder of a woman raised in cramped city rooms who had never before stood so close to anything so unguarded and wild. They will not trouble you, I said. They have run these grounds longer than I have worn this crown. My grandfather used to say a pack that keeps no wolves within its walls has forgotten what it is a pack of. May I? She asked, already half kneeling, and at my nod she held out one hand, slow and open, the way I imagined she once coaxed roots into unwilling soil. The larger of the two wolves considered her a long moment with old gold eyes, then crossed the yard and pressed its head into her palm as though it had been waiting all evening for exactly that invitation. I felt something move through me at the sight of it that I did not try to name that night, only marked, quietly, as further proof of what I had already known since the first note in the hall, that some things recognize their own before the rest of us find the words for it. The wolf stayed at her side the whole visit, and when we finally rose to go, it followed us as far as the yard gate and no farther, watching her go with an attentiveness I understood completely. Your grandfather sounds as though he knew what he was building, Brylin said, glancing back once at the gate. He knew that a hall without something wild and something beautiful in it eventually forgets what it is meant to protect, I said. I did not understand him fully until 3 nights ago. I understand him a great deal better now. The fox-masked lord left Fernhallow within the week of the masquerade, his invitation not renewed. I did not need to banish him with any great speech. A king need only stop inviting cruelty back to his table, and cruelty, finding no more chairs kept warm for it, generally finds somewhere else to sit. The feathered masked woman lingered a little longer, until it became clear that no amount of sweetness aimed at Brylin would earn her anything but my continued watchful distance, and then she too found business elsewhere. When the day came that I asked her properly, it was not in the great hall with its gilt and its watching nobles, but in her small garden at dusk, among the herbs she had taught to grow in soil that had never held anything before her. I had rehearsed a great many kingly phrases on the walk over, and abandoned every one of them the moment she looked up at me from the bed of rosemary she was tending. You have that look again, she said, the one that means you have escaped your counsel with something particular on your mind. I have, I said, and found, once more, that the honest words came easier than the rehearsed ones. I do not want a treaty, Brylin. I do not want an alliance or a dowry or anything my father would have called wise. I want the sound of your hands on that harp every evening for the rest of my life, and I want to be the man who gets to sit near enough to hear it. I am asking you to be my wife, not because a bond struck itself in me the night I heard your first note, though it did, and not because it would please my counsel, though it would not, but because I have not drawn an easy breath since that night that was not made easier by the thought of you in it." She set down the rosemary very carefully, as though it required her whole attention, though I think it was only that she needed a moment before she trusted her voice. "They pushed me toward that harp to humiliate me," she said. "I have turned that over every night since, wondering what I would have missed if I had simply refused to sit down. I keep arriving at the same answer. I would have missed you." "Is that a yes?" I asked, "or only a very thorough way of avoiding the question?" She laughed, the sound of it startling a pair of sparrows from the hedge, and said, "It is a yes, you impossible man. And I do not believe I have ever crossed a shorter distance with a fuller heart than the few steps it took to reach her after that. As for the harp in my hall, I have not had it moved, though my steward has twice suggested a finer one might suit a king's house better. I like the old one exactly as it is. I like even more the particular evening once a season when Brylan sits at it again in front of the whole court, unmasked now and entirely unafraid, and plays the same low note that first stopped every hand in my hall from lifting its cup, so that anyone new to Fernhallow's feasts might understand, without needing the story explained to them twice, exactly what it sounds like when a joke fails and something truer takes its place. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the hall has emptied and only the two of us remain by the fire, she plays something with no name at all, something she says she is still composing, and I sit and listen and think of the moth mask tilted up to me in torchlight, wary and waiting, and of how glad I am that I did not let the crowd close over her before I had learned to hear what I was hearing.